The autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Ravenshollow Manor, each droplet a tiny prison bar that seemed to mock Lady Evangeline Ashworth as she stood in her drawing-room, watching the grey Yorkshire countryside blur into watercolour smudges. At 22, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that poets wrote sonnets about, cascades of golden hair that caught lamplight like spun silk, eyes the colour of forget-me-nots, and a complexion that rivaled the finest porcelain in her husband's collection. Yet for all her physical perfection, Evangeline felt as brittle and lifeless as those very same ornaments that adorned the mantelpiece. "My dear wife," came the grating voice of Baron Cornelius Ashworth from behind her, causing her shoulders to tense involuntarily. "You've been standing there for nearly an hour. Surely there are more productive ways to occupy your time." Evangeline turned slowly, her silk bustle rustling against the Persian carpet. Her husband stood in the doorway, his considerable bulk filling the frame. Cornelius was a man whose wealth far exceeded his physical appeal. His face bore the unfortunate combination of a weak chin, small eyes that sat too close together, and a complexion mottled by years of excessive port consumption. His thinning hair was combed over his scalp in a futile attempt to disguise his baldness, and his lips, perpetually wet, curved into what he likely believed was a charming smile, but which Evangeline found utterly repulsive. "I was merely contemplating the weather, husband," she replied, her voice carefully modulated to show neither affection nor disdain, a skill she had perfected during their 3 years of marriage. "Contemplating weather," he scoffed, adjusting his waistcoat over his protruding belly. "What a luxury to have such idle time! Perhaps you should contemplate instead when you might fulfill your wifely duties and provide me with an heir. The Ashworth line requires continuation." The familiar knot of dread tightened in Evangeline's stomach. Their marriage had been arranged by her late father, a gesture designed to settle gambling debts and secure her family's crumbling estate. She had been 19, innocent, and entirely unprepared for the reality of matrimony with a man she found physically revolting. Cornelius's nightly visits to her chambers were endured rather than welcomed, brief encounters that left her feeling hollow and used. "I pray nightly for such a blessing," she lied smoothly, having long ago mastered the art of saying what he wished to hear. "Prayers," Cornelius snorted. "Speaking of which, we have a new confessor arriving tomorrow. Father Benedict has finally succumbed to his age and requested retirement to the monastery in Scotland. The bishop has sent us a replacement, Father Gabriel Sinclair, fresh from seminary in Rome, they tell me. Young man, apparently. I trust you'll make the appropriate arrangements for his welcome." "Of course, my lord." Evangeline inclined her head dutifully, though inwardly she felt a flicker of curiosity. The departure of elderly Father Benedict, with his kind eyes and gentle manner, saddened her. Their weekly confessions had been among the few moments of peace in her life, his soft voice offering absolution for sins that seemed to pale in comparison to the daily sin of living without love. "Good. And Evangeline?" Cornelius paused at the threshold. "Do try to look more cheerful. Your melancholy countenance reflects poorly on our household. Remember, you are Lady Ashworth now. Act accordingly." With that pronouncement, he departed, leaving behind only the lingering scent of brandy and cigar smoke. Evangeline returned her gaze to the rain-soaked landscape, wondering if somewhere beyond those grey hills lay a world where young women married for love rather than obligation, where happiness was not a luxury reserved for the pages of novels. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the storm having swept away the oppressive clouds to reveal a sky the color of robins' eggs. Evangeline stood in the manor's entrance hall, flanked by the household staff, waiting to receive their new spiritual adviser. She wore her finest day dress, a creation of midnight blue velvet with intricate beadwork that complemented her fair complexion, though she told herself it was merely appropriate respect for a man of the cloth, nothing more. The sound of hoofbeats on the gravel drive announced the arrival of their guest. Through the tall windows, Evangeline glimpsed a simple black carriage bearing the bishop's coat of arms. Her heart inexplicably quickened as the vehicle drew to a halt before their grand entrance. Cornelius appeared beside her, adjusting his cravat with the pompous air of a man about to receive visiting royalty. "Remember, my dear, Father Sinclair comes highly recommended. We must make a favorable impression." The front doors opened to admit their butler, Henley, who stepped aside with practiced precision. "Father Gabriel Sinclair," he announced in his sonorous voice. What happened next would forever remain etched in Evangeline's memory with crystalline clarity. The man who stepped across their threshold bore no resemblance to any priest she had ever encountered. Father Gabriel Sinclair appeared to be perhaps 30 years of age, tall and lean, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His hair was dark as midnight, thick and slightly wavy where it brushed his collar, and his eyes, dear heaven, his eyes, were the deep green of ancient forests, intelligent and penetrating. His features were carved with classical precision, a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and a mouth that suggested both strength and sensitivity. Even beneath his simple black cassock, it was evident that his frame was that of a man who had known physical labor before answering his calling. "Lord Ashworth," Father Gabriel said, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to resonate in Evangeline's very bones. "Lady Ashworth." He bowed gracefully to each in turn, and when his eyes met Evangeline's, she felt something shift within her chest, as if a door she hadn't known existed had suddenly opened. "Father Sinclair," Cornelius boomed, stepping forward to clasp the priest's hand with excessive enthusiasm. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow. We are honored to have you minister to our spiritual needs." "The honor is mine, my lord," Gabriel replied, though his gaze seemed drawn back to Evangeline with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "I look forward to serving this community." "My wife will show you to the rectory," Cornelius declared, apparently oblivious to the charged atmosphere. "I must attend to business matters, but we shall dine together this evening. Cook has prepared a feast in your honor." As the Baron departed with his characteristic lack of sensitivity, Evangeline found herself alone with Father Gabriel, acutely aware of her elevated pulse and the way the entrance hall suddenly seemed smaller with his presence filling it. "Shall we?" she managed, gesturing toward the side door that led to the path to the rectory. They walked in silence through the manor's gardens, the autumn air crisp against their faces. Evangeline was hyper-aware of his presence beside her, the measured cadence of his steps, the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, the clean scent of soap, and something indefinably masculine that seemed to emanate from his person. "Your grounds are beautiful," Father Gabriel observed as they passed through her prized rose garden, now showing the first touches of autumn's golden palette. "Thank you. I tend them myself," she replied, then immediately wondered why she had shared such a personal detail. "That is, I supervise the gardeners closely." He stopped beside a late-blooming rose, its petals the color of cream tinged with pink. "My mother had a garden much like this," he said softly, his voice carrying a note of wistfulness. "She always said that God revealed his artistry most clearly in flowers." "Your mother, does she still tend her garden?" Evangeline asked, then caught herself. "Forgive me, I shouldn't pry into personal matters." Father Gabriel turned to face her fully, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "She passed when I was 18, my lady. But I believe she would have loved this place, and appreciated the care you've given to creating such beauty." There was something in his tone, a warmth and genuine appreciation, that was so foreign to Evangeline's daily existence that she felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time someone had acknowledged her efforts, her contributions, as more than mere wifely duty? "I'm sorry for your loss," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "Thank you." His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through to her soul. "Sometimes I think the greatest tragedies shape us into who we're meant to become." They resumed walking, the rectory coming into view, a charming stone cottage covered in ivy, with mullioned windows and a wooden door painted a cheerful blue. As they approached, Evangeline found herself wishing their walk could continue indefinitely, though she couldn't entirely understand why. "I trust you'll find the accommodations suitable," she said as they reached the threshold. "Mrs. Crawford, the housekeeper, has stocked the larder and prepared the rooms. If you require anything further, please don't hesitate to send word to the manor." Father Gabriel paused with his hand on the door latch. "Lady Ashworth," he said quietly, "I hope you know that the church is always open to those who seek solace, guidance, or simply understanding." The way he spoke those words, the gentle emphasis on understanding, made Evangeline feel as though he had glimpsed the loneliness she worked so hard to conceal. She managed a gracious smile, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Of course, Father. I look forward to confession on Sunday." "As do I, my lady." As she made her way back to the manor, Evangeline told herself that the flutter in her chest was merely the result of meeting someone new, someone who seemed genuinely kind in a household where kindness was in short supply. She refused to acknowledge the voice in her head that whispered she was already counting the hours until Sunday's service. The following Sunday arrived wrapped in golden autumn light that streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Margaret's Church, casting jeweled patterns across the ancient stone floors. Evangeline sat in the Ashworth family pew, her hands folded in her lap, trying to concentrate on Father Gabriel's sermon. His rich voice filled the sacred space as he spoke of compassion, of finding grace in unexpected places, of the courage required to live authentically in a world that often demanded conformity. Every word seemed directed at her heart, though she knew such thoughts were foolish vanity. Still, she found herself hanging on each phrase, studying the way the light caught the strong lines of his profile, the graceful movements of his hands as he gestured. Beside her, Cornelius dozed intermittently, his breathing heavy and occasionally punctuated by soft snores that made her flush with embarrassment. When the service concluded, parishioners filed forward to greet their new priest. Evangeline watched as Father Gabriel spoke with each person: the elderly Mrs. Pemberton, who ran the village bakery; young Tommy Fletcher, who helped his father with the blacksmithing; the widow Morrison, who struggled to feed her 3 children. With each interaction, she observed his genuine attention, the way he remembered names, asked after specific concerns. How different he was from Father Benedict, kind though the old priest had been. Where Benedict had been gentle and grandfatherly, Gabriel possessed a vitality and presence that seemed to illuminate everyone around him. "Lady Ashworth," he said when she finally approached, and the way he spoke her name sent an inappropriate thrill through her. "I hope you found the service meaningful." "Indeed, Father. Your words about living authentically were particularly resonant." She chose her words carefully, aware of Cornelius's presence behind her and the watching eyes of the village. "I'm pleased to hear it." His green eyes held hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. "I hope we might have opportunity to discuss such matters further during confession. I had planned to make my confession this afternoon, if that would be convenient." "Of course. Shall we say 3 o'clock?" The afternoon found Evangeline kneeling in the small confessional booth, her heart racing with an anticipation that had nothing to do with spiritual absolution. Through the carved wooden screen, she could see Father Gabriel's profile, though tradition dictated he would not look directly at her during the sacrament. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "It has been 1 week since my last confession." "What weighs upon your heart, my child?" The tenderness in his voice nearly undid her composure. How could she confess that her greatest sin was the growing attraction she felt for him? That in the few days since his arrival, she had thought of little else but the sound of his voice, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her? "I fear I harbor resentment in my heart, Father, toward my circumstances, my marriage." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I know it is sinful to question God's plan, but I find myself wondering if happiness is meant only for others." There was a long pause before Father Gabriel responded, and when he did, his voice carried a note of understanding that made her pulse quicken. "Sometimes, Lady Ashworth, I believe God places us in situations not as punishment, but to teach us the true value of the gifts he offers. Perhaps your current trial is preparing you to recognize joy when it finally arrives. And if it never arrives? Then perhaps we must have the courage to reach for it ourselves, despite what others might say. The implication in his words was subtle but unmistakable, and Evangeline found herself leaning closer to the screen, as if proximity might help her divine his meaning. "Father, Evangeline." The whisper of her Christian name, spoken with such tenderness, sent shock waves through her system. Through the latticed wood, she saw him turn slightly, and for just a moment their eyes met directly. "Gabriel," she breathed, not caring that the use of his given name violated every protocol of their respective positions. "Forgive me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This is neither the time nor the place for such thoughts." "What thoughts?" she whispered, though her own heart was racing with possibilities. "Thoughts of how beautiful you looked in the rose garden, of how your smile transforms your entire countenance, of wondering what it would be like to—" He stopped abruptly, and she heard him take a shuddering breath. "These are not appropriate reflections for a priest to harbor about a married woman." "Gabriel." "Your penance is 3 Hail Marys," he said formally, though his voice shook slightly. "Go in peace, my child." But as Evangeline left the confessional, her heart hammering against her ribs, peace was the furthest thing from her mind. The seeds of something dangerous and beautiful had been planted, and she found herself both terrified and exhilarated by their potential to grow. October painted the countryside in shades of amber and crimson, and with each passing day, Evangeline found excuses to visit the church or encounter Father Gabriel during his pastoral duties. Their conversations remained carefully proper in public, discussions of parish matters, charitable works, theological questions that allowed her to display the education Cornelius often dismissed as unnecessary in a wife. Yet beneath these innocent exchanges lay currents of electricity that made her skin tingle and her breath catch. It was during one such encounter, as she delivered preserves from the manor's kitchen to supplement his simple meals, that she found him in the rectory's small garden, pruning the late roses with careful precision. The sight of him in shirt-sleeves, his dark hair slightly mussed from the autumn breeze, sent a familiar flutter through her chest. "Lady Ashworth," he said, straightening as she approached, "how thoughtful of you to bring provisions." "Mrs. Crawford prepared far too many preserves this season," she replied, though they both knew this was a convenient fiction. "I thought you might appreciate some variety in your meals." "Your consideration for my welfare is touching," he said softly, and there was something in his tone that made her look up sharply. He was studying her with those penetrating green eyes, his expression unguarded for once. "Gabriel," she whispered, drawn to step closer despite knowing she shouldn't. "We shouldn't be alone like this," he said, though he made no move to step away. "Your husband is entertaining business associates and won't return until evening," she finished. "The servants believe I'm visiting the sick in the village." The admission hung between them, acknowledgment of the deliberate deception she had employed to create this moment of privacy. Gabriel's jaw tightened, and she could see the internal struggle playing out across his features. "Evangeline, what are we doing?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I only know that since you arrived, I feel as though I've been awakened from a long sleep. For the first time in years, I feel alive." He reached toward her involuntarily, then caught himself, his hand dropping to his side. "You don't understand what you're saying. I've taken vows." "And I've taken vows as well," she interrupted, stepping closer until only inches separated them. "Vows that bind me to a man who sees me as property, who cares nothing for my thoughts, my dreams, my heart. You speak of your calling, but what if God has called us to each other?" "Evangeline." "When you look at me, I see myself reflected in your eyes as someone worthy of tenderness, of understanding. When you speak my name, I remember who I was before I became merely Lady Ashworth." "Is that so sinful?" Gabriel's composure finally cracked. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs tracing the delicate line of her cheekbones. "You are the most beautiful, the most precious. God help me, I think of you every moment. When I pray, your face appears before me. When I perform the sacraments, I find myself wondering what it would be like to hold you, to protect you, to cherish you as you deserve. Then hold me," she whispered, swaying toward him. "Just once. Let me know what it feels like to be treasured." With a sound that was half prayer, half surrender, Gabriel gathered her into his arms. For a moment, they simply held each other, and Evangeline felt as though she had finally found harbor after years of drifting at sea. His heartbeat thundered beneath her cheek, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. "This is madness," he murmured into her hair. "Then let us be mad together," she replied, lifting her face to his. Their first kiss was gentle, reverent, as though they were handling something sacred and fragile. But as Evangeline's arms twined around his neck and she pressed closer, something ignited between them. Gabriel's mouth moved against hers with growing passion, his hands tangling in her golden hair, and she felt as though she were being consumed by fire, a glorious, transformative flame that burned away everything she had been before this moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily, and Gabriel's eyes held a stunned wonder that mirrored her own feelings. "What have we done?" he whispered. "We've found each other," Evangeline replied, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Against all odds, despite every obstacle, we've found love." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that made her shiver. "Evangeline, my darling girl, what future can we possibly have? I am bound by sacred vows, and you are married to another. Any path we take leads only to scandal and ruin." "I don't care about scandal," she said fiercely. "I care about you. About us. Surely love this pure, this deep, cannot be entirely sinful." Gabriel pulled her close again, burying his face in the curve of her neck. "I should send you away," he said against her skin. "I should transfer to another parish, put distance between us before we commit acts we cannot undo." "But you won't," she said, not a question but a statement of certainty. "God forgive me, I won't." He lifted his head to meet her eyes. "I love you, Evangeline. Against all reason, against my vows, against everything I thought I knew about my calling. I love you with every fiber of my being." "And I love you," she replied, the words feeling like both salvation and damnation on her lips. As autumn deepened into winter, their clandestine meetings became more frequent and more dangerous. They met in the abandoned gamekeeper's cottage on the edge of the estate, in the secluded grove where the ancient oak trees formed a natural cathedral, in the church itself after evening services when the village slept. With each encounter, their emotional bond deepened, and the physical attraction between them grew more difficult to deny. The winter of 1889 was particularly harsh, blanketing Yorkshire in deep snow that isolated the village and created a world of pristine white beauty. For Evangeline and Gabriel, the forced intimacy of the season provided both opportunity and torment. Cornelius spent increasing time in London on business, leaving his wife ostensibly free to pursue her charitable works that increasingly took her to the rectory and into Gabriel's arms. It was on a February evening, with snow falling softly outside the windows of the gamekeeper's cottage, that their relationship crossed the final threshold from emotional intimacy to physical consummation. Gabriel had lit a fire in the ancient hearth, and by its golden light Evangeline appeared ethereal, her hair unbound and flowing over her shoulders like spun silk. "I should go," she whispered, though she made no move toward the door. "Cornelius returns from London tomorrow." "Stay," Gabriel replied, moving to stand before her. "Please. Just a few more hours." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "Gabriel, what are we doing to ourselves? This love, it's destroying us both." "Then let it destroy us," he said fiercely, catching her hand and pressing it to his heart. I would rather be destroyed by love than live another day without you." The wind howled around the cottage, creating a cocoon of intimacy that seemed to exist outside the normal world. In that moment, sacred vows and social conventions felt as insubstantial as the snow swirling beyond the windows. "Evangeline," Gabriel whispered, his voice rough with longing. "My beloved, my heart." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her love and desperation into the contact. When they broke apart, both knew that they had reached a point from which there could be no retreat. What transpired that night was beyond mere physical passion. It was a communion of souls, a sacred act that transcended the boundaries of flesh. In Gabriel's arms, Evangeline discovered what it meant to be truly cherished, to be loved not just for her beauty but for her mind, her spirit, her essential self. And Gabriel, despite his broken vows, found in their union something that felt less like sin than like the completion of his very soul. Afterward, as they lay entwined before the dying fire, Evangeline traced patterns on Gabriel's chest and marveled at how right this felt, how perfectly they seemed to fit together. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "no matter what price we must pay for this night, I will never regret loving you." "Nor I you," he replied, pressing a kiss to the crown of her head. "If God judges us for this love, then I will face that judgment gladly, knowing I have experienced heaven in your arms." Spring's arrival brought both hope and terror, for by April, Evangeline could no longer deny the signs her body was giving her. The morning sickness she had initially attributed to nerves, the changes in her appetite and energy, the subtle alterations in her figure, all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. She was with child. The revelation of her condition sent Evangeline into a state of panic and exhilaration that left her barely able to function. During her clandestine meeting with Gabriel in their secret grove, she watched his face transform through a spectrum of emotions: shock, joy, terror, and finally, a fierce protectiveness that made her heart soar even as fear gripped her throat. "Are you certain?" he asked, though the answer was written clearly in her glowing complexion and the new fullness of her figure. "Quite certain," she replied, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat abdomen. "Gabriel, what are we to do? If Cornelius suspects—" "He won't suspect," Gabriel said firmly, though she could see the worry in his green eyes. "When were you last intimate with your husband?" Evangeline flushed at the direct question. 3 weeks ago. He visited my chambers after returning from London, as is his custom." She had endured Cornelius's fumbling attentions with her usual detachment, thinking only of Gabriel, as she always did during such ordeals. Gabriel began pacing, his mind clearly working through possibilities. "The timing could work in our favor. If you can convince him that the child is his." "You want me to lie to him? To let him believe this baby is his heir?" "I want to protect you," Gabriel said fiercely, grasping her shoulders. "And our child?" "Evangeline, if the truth were discovered, you would be ruined, cast out, possibly sent to an asylum. And I would be defrocked, exiled. Our child would be born a bastard with no name, no future." The brutal reality of their situation crashed over her like a cold wave. In Victorian society, a woman's adultery was a crime punishable by social death, while a priest who broke his vows of celibacy faced not only disgrace but potential imprisonment. Their love, beautiful as it was to them, would be seen by the world as the worst kind of sin. But to deceive him for the rest of our lives. She whispered, "What choice do we have?" Gabriel cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "My darling, I would claim you and our child before the world if I could, but we must be practical. This deception, it's the only way to keep you safe." Over the following weeks, Evangeline threw herself into the role of hopeful wife with an actress's skill. She began speaking to Cornelius about her hopes for children, mentioning her recent fatigue and morning queasiness in casual conversation. When the village doctor confirmed her condition, her husband's reaction was everything she had hoped for: unbridled joy at the prospect of an heir, coupled with a possessive pride that made her stomach turn. "At last," Cornelius declared, pacing his study with unusual animation. "The Ashworth line shall continue. I must write to my brother immediately, and to the solicitor about updating the will. My dear wife, you have made me the happiest of men." Evangeline smiled and accepted his awkward embrace, all the while thinking of Gabriel's hands on her body, Gabriel's child growing within her. The deception felt like acid on her tongue, but she forced herself to play the part convincingly. As her pregnancy progressed, the challenges of maintaining their secret grew more complex. Gabriel continued his pastoral duties with apparent normalcy, though Evangeline could see the strain in the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders during Sunday services. Their stolen moments together became even more precious and more dangerous. "You're beginning to show," he observed during one of their meetings in the abandoned cottage, his hand resting gently on the slight curve of her belly beneath her loosened stays. "Mrs. Henley mentioned that I seem to be blooming," Evangeline said with a wry smile. "She attributes it to the joy of impending motherhood." "You are blooming," Gabriel said softly, his eyes tender as they traced her face. "You've never been more beautiful than you are now, carrying our child." "Our child," she repeated wonderingly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it's real." "It's real," he assured her, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "And whatever comes, this baby will be loved beyond measure." But even as they spoke of love and hope, both were acutely aware of the precarious nature of their situation. Evangeline had to carefully time her visits to Gabriel, ensuring that her increased time away from the manor could be explained by pregnancy-related needs. More frequent visits to the doctor, longer periods of rest, sudden cravings that required trips to the village. Meanwhile, Gabriel struggled with the growing weight of his deception, the knowledge that he was not only breaking his vows but actively participating in a fraud that could destroy multiple lives. Summer brought with it the full flowering of Evangeline's pregnancy, and with it increasingly creative challenges in maintaining their elaborate charade. At 5 months along, she could no longer hide her condition, and Cornelius's pride in his virile accomplishment became insufferable. He insisted on announcing the impending arrival to every business associate, every social acquaintance, treating Evangeline like a prize mare who had finally proven her worth. "My dear fellow," she overheard him boasting to his solicitor, "I always knew she had it in her. Fine breeding stock, the Worthington line. The child shall be born in December, a Christmas blessing, as it were." Evangeline retreated to her rose garden, where the summer blooms provided some measure of peace amidst the growing complexity of her deception. It was there that Gabriel found her one evening, having taken advantage of Cornelius's absence in the village to steal a few precious moments with her. "You look troubled," he observed, settling beside her on the stone bench despite the impropriety of such proximity to the manor. "I am troubled," she admitted, one hand resting on her noticeably rounded belly. "Gabriel, what if our child looks like you? What if there are features that mark him or her as clearly not Cornelius's offspring?" Gabriel considered this soberly. "We must hope that Providence is kind to us. Many children bear little resemblance to either parent in infancy. And your coloring is fair enough that if the baby inherits my darker hair, it might be attributed to some distant relative." "And if the child has your eyes? Those remarkable green eyes that are so distinctive?" "Then we pray that Cornelius is too proud and too eager to claim his heir to look too closely," Gabriel replied, though she could hear the underlying anxiety in his voice. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Gabriel immediately rose and stepped behind the gardener's shed, while Evangeline arranged herself on the bench with a book of prayers, a tableau of innocent devotion should anyone discover her. The rider proved to be Dr. Whitmore, the elderly physician who had been attending her throughout her pregnancy. He dismounted with the careful movements of a man well past 70, his weathered face creased with professional concern. "Lady Ashworth," he called, approaching with his familiar black bag. I hope you don't mind the unscheduled visit. I was attending young Mrs. Fletcher in the village and thought I might check on your progress while I was nearby. Of course, Doctor, Evangeline replied graciously, though her heart raced at the thought of Gabriel hidden mere yards away. Though I must say, I've been feeling quite well of late. Dr. Whitmore examined her with his usual thoroughness, listening to the baby's heartbeat through his primitive stethoscope and commenting on the healthy progress of her pregnancy. Throughout the examination, Evangeline was acutely aware of Gabriel's presence, wondering what he must think of hearing another man discuss their child's development. Everything appears to be progressing normally, Dr. Whitmore announced, packing away his instruments. The baby's position is good, and based on my calculations, I would estimate delivery in early to mid-December, just as your husband predicted. After the doctor departed, Gabriel emerged from hiding, his face pale with the strain of remaining concealed while hearing intimate details of Evangeline's condition. "December," he said quietly. "Our child will be born at Christmas." "It seems fitting," Evangeline replied, attempting to lighten the mood. "A time of miracles and new beginnings." But privately, she wondered if their miracle might prove to be their downfall. November arrived with an early snowfall that seemed to isolate Ravenshollow Manor from the rest of the world. Evangeline, now heavy with child and moving with the careful deliberation of a woman in her final month of pregnancy, found her emotional state increasingly fragile. The strain of maintaining her deception, combined with the physical demands of her condition, left her exhausted and prone to tears that she struggled to hide from Cornelius. Her husband, meanwhile, had grown insufferably attentive, hovering over her with the anxiety of a man who viewed her pregnancy as his most important business venture. He had insisted on hiring a London physician to attend the birth, dismissing Dr. Whitmore as adequate for village complaints but hardly suitable for the delivery of the Ashworth heir. "Dr. Harrison comes highly recommended," Cornelius explained for the dozenth time as they sat in the morning-room, Evangeline's needlework forgotten in her lap. "Educated at Edinburgh, practiced on Harley Street. He's delivered children for 3 earls and a duke." "I'm sure his credentials are impeccable," Evangeline replied wearily, her hand resting on her swollen belly where the baby seemed determined to press against her ribs. "Only the best for my son," Cornelius declared, then caught himself. "Or daughter, of course, though I'm certain it's a boy. The way you're carrying, all in front, neat and tidy, that's how my mother carried my brother and me." Evangeline forced a smile while internally recoiling at the comparison. The thought of this child, Gabriel's child, being claimed so completely by Cornelius filled her with a mixture of guilt and protective rage. "Have you given thought to names?" she asked, partly to distract him and partly because the question had been weighing on her mind. "For a boy, naturally he shall be Cornelius the Fourth," her husband replied without hesitation. "For a girl," he waved dismissively, "something suitable. Margaret, perhaps, after the church." The casual dismissal of their daughter's potential existence, for Evangeline felt certain she carried a girl, sparked a rare moment of defiance. "I should prefer Catherine," she said firmly. "After my mother." Cornelius looked surprised at her assertiveness but nodded magnanimously. "As you wish, my dear, though I maintain it will be a boy." That evening, despite the risk, Evangeline met Gabriel in the church after Vespers. The sacred space was illuminated only by flickering candles, creating a sanctuary of shadows and golden light where they could speak freely. "Catherine," Gabriel repeated softly when she told him of the conversation. "A beautiful name for our daughter." "You're so certain it's a girl," Evangeline said, settling carefully on one of the wooden pews, her hand supporting her lower back. "I am," he replied, kneeling beside her so their faces were level. "I dream of her sometimes, golden hair like yours, but with eyes that might betray her true parentage." "Gabriel, what if—" "Sure." He pressed a gentle finger to her lips. "We've discussed this countless times. Whatever comes, we'll face it together, even if we must do so from a distance." Evangeline caught his hand, pressing it to her cheek. "I'm frightened," she admitted. "Not of the birth itself, but of what comes after. How will I bear watching you baptize our child, knowing you can never claim her as your own?" Gabriel's jaw tightened with suppressed emotion. "The same way you'll bear watching Cornelius call himself her father, I suppose. Through love and faith, and the knowledge that our sacrifice protects her." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the church door creaking open. Both froze, Gabriel rising swiftly and stepping away from Evangeline as footsteps echoed in the nave. "My lady," came the querulous voice of Mrs. Henley, the head housekeeper. "Are you quite well? Lord Ashworth is asking for you." "I'm here, Mrs. Henley," Evangeline called, struggling to rise with as much dignity as her condition allowed. "I was seeking comfort in prayer. The baby has been particularly active this evening." The elderly housekeeper appeared in the candlelight, her expression softening with maternal concern. "Oh, my dear, you shouldn't be wandering about alone in your condition. Father Sinclair, thank goodness you were here to keep watch over her ladyship." "It was my honor," Gabriel replied with perfect composure, though Evangeline could see the tension in his shoulders. Lady Ashworth was indeed finding solace in her devotions. "Perhaps I might escort you both back to the manor?" As they made their way through the snowy landscape, Mrs. Henley chattering about preparations for the expected arrival, Evangeline walked carefully between the two people who knew her most intimately, one who loved her completely, and one who cared for her with loyal devotion but remained blissfully unaware of her secrets. The next few weeks passed in a blur of final preparations and mounting tension. Dr. Harrison arrived from London, a pompous man with mutton-chop whiskers who examined Evangeline with clinical detachment while lecturing Cornelius on the importance of providing his wife with absolute quiet and proper nutrition. "The child will arrive within the fortnight," he pronounced after his examination. "Everything appears to be progressing normally, though I must caution that first births can be unpredictable." Cornelius paced the drawing-room after the doctor retired, his excitement barely contained. "A fortnight! My son, born in time for Christmas. It's providential, I tell you. Absolutely providential." Evangeline nodded and smiled at appropriate intervals, all the while thinking of Gabriel, who would be conducting midnight mass while she labored to bring their child into the world. The irony was not lost on her. As he celebrated the birth of the Christ child, she would be giving birth to their own secret miracle. On the evening of December 20th, as snow fell heavily outside the manor windows, Evangeline felt the first unmistakable pangs of labor. She had been sitting by the fire, attempting to read, when a sharp pain across her lower back made her gasp and drop her book. "My lady?" asked Sarah, her personal maid, looking up from her mending with alarm. "I think—" Evangeline paused as another wave of pain washed over her. "I think it's time. Please send for Dr. Harrison and inform Lord Ashworth." What followed was a blur of activity as the household sprang into action. Dr. Harrison was summoned from his temporary quarters in the guest wing. Cornelius was fetched from his study where he had been reviewing business correspondence, and the birthing chamber was prepared with all the efficiency that came from months of planning. "My dear wife," Cornelius said, bursting into their bedchamber with uncharacteristic emotion, "how do you feel? Are you in great pain? Should I send for the vicar to offer prayers?" The mention of Gabriel sent a sharp pang through Evangeline's heart. How she longed to have him here, to draw strength from his presence during this momentous time. Instead, she was surrounded by strangers and a husband whose excited pacing only increased her anxiety. "Perhaps it would be wise to notify Father Sinclair," she managed between contractions. "For the blessing of the child, should circumstances require it." Of course, of course." Cornelius rubbed his hands together nervously. "Though nothing will go wrong, naturally. You're young and healthy, and Dr. Harrison is the finest physician in London." As her labor progressed through the night, Evangeline found herself drifting between the physical demands of childbirth and memories of her time with Gabriel. She thought of their first meeting in the rose garden, their tentative confessions of love, the night in the gamekeeper's cottage when they had crossed the line from which there could be no return. Each memory gave her strength, reminding her that the pain she endured now was bringing their love into tangible form. Dr. Harrison proved to be competent if unfeeling, issuing brisk orders to the attending servants and monitoring Evangeline's progress with professional detachment. As dawn approached on December 21st, her contractions intensified, and she found herself gripping Sarah's hand with desperate strength. "Not much longer now, my lady," the doctor announced. "I can see the head. You must push with the next contraction." Evangeline bore down with all her strength, thinking not of the pain but of the child who would soon rest in her arms. Gabriel's child, born of a love that transcended every barrier society had placed between them. "One more push," Dr. Harrison commanded, and with a final surge of effort, Evangeline felt her body release its precious burden. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity before being broken by a lusty cry that filled the birthing chamber with life and hope. "A girl," Dr. Harrison announced, lifting the infant for inspection. "A healthy girl, my lord." Evangeline's first glimpse of her daughter took her breath away. The baby was indeed perfect, pink and wrinkled, with a downy covering of dark hair that made Evangeline's heart skip with both joy and terror. Even in those first moments, she could see Gabriel in the shape of the child's eyes, the set of her tiny mouth. "A girl," Cornelius repeated, and Evangeline detected a note of disappointment in his voice that he quickly masked with enthusiasm. "Well, she's certainly vigorous enough. Listen to those lungs. She'll do well until we can provide her with brothers." Dr. Harrison completed his examination and handed the cleaned infant to Evangeline, who cradled her daughter with trembling arms. The baby quieted immediately, as if recognizing the heartbeat she had heard for 9 months, and opened eyes that were unmistakably Gabriel's deep green. "Hello, my darling Catherine," Evangeline whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Welcome to the world, my precious girl." The next few hours passed in a haze of exhaustion and overwhelming love. Cornelius departed to send telegrams announcing the birth, Dr. Harrison retired to document the successful delivery, and Evangeline was left alone with her daughter and the profound realization that her life had changed irrevocably. It was midday when Gabriel finally arrived at the manor, summoned ostensibly to offer prayers of thanksgiving for the safe delivery. Evangeline heard his voice in the corridor outside her chamber, speaking with Cornelius about the arrangements for the child's christening, and her heart raced with anticipation. "Ah, Father Sinclair," Cornelius boomed as Gabriel was admitted to the birthing chamber. "Come and meet the newest member of the Ashworth family, Catherine Elizabeth Ashworth, born this morning at 6:30." Gabriel approached the bed where Evangeline lay with their daughter in her arms, and she watched his face carefully, seeing him struggle to maintain his composure as he gazed upon their child for the first time. "She's beautiful," he said softly, his voice slightly hoarse. "Truly beautiful. You must be very proud, my lord." "Indeed we are," Cornelius replied. "Though I confess I had hoped for a son first, she's certainly a fine specimen. Look at that hair. Dark as night, like my grandfather's side of the family." Evangeline met Gabriel's eyes over the baby's head, sharing a moment of perfect understanding and profound sorrow. Their daughter was here, healthy and perfect, but the price of her safety was that Gabriel could never claim her, could never hold her as anything more than the parish priest offering his blessing. "Would you care to hold her, father?" Evangeline asked quietly. "For the blessing?" Gabriel's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the infant, and Evangeline saw tears gather in his eyes as he looked down at their daughter. Catherine gazed up at him with those unmistakably familiar green eyes, and for a moment the resemblance was so clear that Evangeline feared even Cornelius must see it. "Heavenly Father," Gabriel began, his voice steady despite his emotion, "we thank you for the safe arrival of this precious child. Bless her with health and happiness, surround her with love, and guide her steps throughout her life. May she grow in wisdom and grace, bringing joy to all who know her. Amen. Amen, Cornelius echoed, apparently oblivious to the intensity of emotion radiating from the priest holding his supposed daughter. Gabriel handed Catherine back to Evangeline with obvious reluctance, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange, a fleeting touch that spoke volumes about all they could never say aloud. "I shall look forward to performing the christening," Gabriel said formally. "When would you prefer to schedule the ceremony, my lord?" "The first Sunday of the new year," Cornelius declared. "A fitting way to begin 1890, don't you think? And it will give my wife time to recover properly." As the days passed and Evangeline regained her strength, she found herself torn between joy in her daughter's presence and anguish at the elaborate deception that surrounded every aspect of Catherine's existence. The baby was thriving, nursing well and growing stronger each day, but her resemblance to Gabriel became more pronounced rather than less. "She has the most extraordinary eyes," commented Mrs. Henley one afternoon as she helped Evangeline with the infant's bath. "Such an unusual shade of green. Quite striking." "Indeed," Evangeline replied carefully. "Cornelius believes she favors his great-uncle Reginald, who was said to have remarkable eyes." The lie came easily now, one of dozens she had constructed to explain away any feature that might betray Catherine's true parentage. Yet each falsehood felt like another weight upon her soul, another barrier between herself and the authentic life she craved. Gabriel visited the manor regularly in his official capacity, consulting about the christening arrangements and offering pastoral care to the new mother. Their interactions remained scrupulously proper in front of others, but Evangeline treasured the moments when their eyes would meet over Catherine's head, sharing the profound love they felt for their daughter and for each other. It was during one such visit, when Cornelius had been called away on urgent business, that Gabriel was finally able to hold Catherine again without the pretense of a formal blessing. They sat in the nursery, curtains drawn against the winter afternoon, while their daughter slept peacefully in her father's arms. "She's growing so quickly," Gabriel murmured, studying Catherine's delicate features with wonder. "Already she seems more alert, more aware." "She knows you," Evangeline said softly. "When she hears your voice, she turns her head to find you. Babies have instincts about these things." Gabriel lifted Catherine slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to the downy crown of her head. "My daughter," he whispered, and Evangeline saw tears slide down his cheeks. "My precious, beautiful daughter, whom I can never claim, never protect as a father should." "You protect her by staying away," Evangeline reminded him, though her own heart was breaking. "By maintaining this deception, by ensuring she grows up with legitimacy and security." "And what of us?" Gabriel asked, his voice raw with pain. "How long can we continue this way? Watching our child grow up calling another man father, pretending we are nothing more than priest and parishioner?" Evangeline reached out to touch his hand, her fingers tracing the strong line of his knuckles. "As long as we must. We have no other choice, Gabriel. This is the price of our love." As the new year approached, preparations for Catherine's christening intensified. Cornelius had invited half the county to witness the ceremony, determined to show off his heir, for despite her sex, he had begun referring to Catherine as his heir, claiming that her exceptional beauty and evident intelligence marked her as destined for greatness. "The dress belonged to my great-grandmother," he explained to Evangeline as they examined the elaborate christening gown, a confection of antique lace and silk that had adorned generations of Ashworth infants. "Every Ashworth child for the past century has worn it for their baptism." Evangeline fingered the delicate fabric, thinking of all the babies who had worn this gown before her daughter, all the families who had stood at the font believing in the legitimacy of their heritage. How many of them, she wondered, had harbored secrets as profound as hers? "It's beautiful," she said aloud. "Catherine will look like an angel." "Indeed she will," Cornelius agreed, his chest swelling with pride. "Father Sinclair has suggested we schedule the ceremony for immediately after morning service, so the entire congregation can witness the blessing of the Ashworth heir. The bitter irony was not lost on Evangeline. Their daughter's baptism would be performed by her true father, witnessed by a church full of people who had no idea they were observing the ultimate expression of forbidden love made flesh. On the morning of January 5, 1890, the Church of St. Margaret was packed to capacity with villagers and gentry alike, all eager to witness the christening of Lady Ashworth's daughter. Evangeline, radiant in a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her fair coloring, carried Catherine to the ancient stone font where Gabriel waited in his formal vestments. The baby looked ethereal in the ancestral christening gown, her dark hair a striking contrast to the white lace, her green eyes bright and alert as she gazed around the crowded church. As Evangeline approached the font, her eyes met Gabriel's, and she saw in his expression all the love and anguish that mirrored her own feelings. "Dearly beloved," Gabriel began, his rich voice carrying easily through the sacred space, "we are gathered here today to welcome Catherine Elizabeth Ashworth into the family of God through the sacrament of baptism." Evangeline listened to the familiar words of the ceremony, watching Gabriel's face as he performed the ritual that would mark their daughter as his spiritual child in the only way society would ever acknowledge their connection. When he took Catherine in his arms to hold her over the font, both parents were acutely aware that this might be the only time he could publicly embrace his child. "Catherine Elizabeth," Gabriel said solemnly, his voice steady despite the emotion Evangeline knew he was feeling, "I baptize thee in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." The holy water touched Catherine's forehead, and she gave a small cry of protest that brought gentle laughter from the congregation. Gabriel's eyes met Evangeline's over their daughter's head, and in that moment they shared something profound and sacred that transcended all the barriers between them. "Amen," the congregation responded, and Catherine Elizabeth Ashworth was officially welcomed into the world as the legitimate daughter of Baron Cornelius Ashworth, while her true father handed her back to her mother with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. The celebration that followed at Ravenshollow Manor was elaborate and joyful, with toasts to Catherine's health and future, gifts from well-wishers, and endless speculation about whom she resembled and what kind of woman she might become. Throughout it all, Evangeline played her part perfectly, accepting congratulations with gracious smiles while her heart ached for the impossible life she could never have with Gabriel and their daughter. As winter melted into spring, and Catherine grew from infant to a bright-eyed baby who smiled at the sound of Gabriel's voice during his pastoral visits, Evangeline found herself facing a new challenge, the growing certainty that their secret could not remain hidden forever. Every day that passed increased the likelihood that someone would notice Catherine's resemblance to the handsome young priest, would see the way he looked at her with more than pastoral affection, would put together the pieces of a puzzle that could destroy them all. Yet for now, in the quiet moments when she held her daughter close and watched the Yorkshire countryside bloom with the promise of summer, Evangeline allowed herself to believe that love, even forbidden, secret love, could conquer all obstacles. Catherine was healthy and beautiful, Gabriel was safe in his position, and the world remained ignorant of their truth. It would have to be enough, she told herself, even as her heart yearned for so much more. Their daughter was living proof that from the most impossible circumstances, the most magnificent love could bloom, and perhaps that was miracle enough for one lifetime.